So first of all, thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Billy Wong. I'll be presenting with my partner, David Watkins, this morning. And we'll spend about maybe between 30 to 40 minutes to talk a little bit about our newly launched Talent 100 rankings, and also talk about how you can utilize this information to your university's advantage. Well, first of all, a little bit of introduction about who we are. So we formed Measures HE, a new analytics company for the higher education sector, fairly recently. We only launched it officially at the beginning of February, but already we have quite a lot of positive responses from the market. We started this company because we can see that a lot of universities have a lot of data, but they have difficulty turning that into insights that they can actually use. Dave and I combined have a lot of experience in the world of higher education, and especially in the world of applying analytics to the world of higher education. So hopefully we would like to contribute to this sector by bringing our skills to help them transform the data that they have into actionable strategies. So a little bit about myself first. My name is Billy Wong. I am one of the co-founders of Measures HE. So before founding this company, I worked for 10 years at Times Education, which is one of the major ranking providers. And I was responsible for the World University Rankings. So not only in terms of running the ranking, putting it together every year, but also understanding the questions and some of the challenges that universities have in terms of understanding the ranking, the questions that they may have, the objections that they may have. And also I worked quite a bit on the evolution of the ranking as well. And other than that, I also work on a lot of the new developments within Times Education. So for example, when the impact ranking, the ranking that measures universities' contribution to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals was first launched, I was running the whole ranking as well. And also I was responsible for the world's first interdisciplinary science rankings. So Dave, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm David Watkins, so the other co-founder of Measures HE. So my background, I was at Times Higher Education for 5 years. I was the managing director of data there, looking after all the rankings. So a lot of specialisms, particularly in the Arab region, but looking at rankings all around the world. Before that, I was in analytics for 25 years, so all forms of analytics, including machine learning back in the 90s when it was very unpopular. I'll hand back to Billy.
Thank you. So today we're going to talk about the Talent 100 rankings that we launched, I think about two weeks ago now. Now, why do we put together a ranking? Well, a ranking is essentially a list, but what we want to do with that is to address something that we hear very often from our colleagues in the higher education sector, which is that the tools that they use at the moment to measure academic performance are obsolete, and very often they actually lead to bad behavior. So the most common tools that people use are, well, first of all, number of publications, and second, the number of citations. And then some people use things such as H-index or FWCI. I will talk about each of these things in a little bit more detail later. And these tools are actually can be quite misleading. And they can also lead to bad behavior as well. So academics, of course, like all human beings, respond to incentives. And sometimes when you put out the wrong metrics, then the incentive is to chase after the metrics rather than chase after good academic performance. So that leads to some gaming behavior, such as, for example, paper mills, artificial citations, and so on. And also these metrics very often has a seniority bias. So what we're actually measuring is whether somebody has been in the field for a long time, rather than whether they are actually making useful contribution. And finally, these metrics are highly inaccurate because they don't actually measure what they claim to measure. So let's talk a little bit about one of the most famous or infamous metrics first, which is H-index. Now, for those who are not familiar with it, H-index basically means, well, if I have an H-index of 5, that means I have 5 articles that receive at least 5 citations. So it is conceptually quite a simple measure, but it has two problems. One is that it conflates volume with quality. So it combines multiple things into one metric, both the quality of your work and the volume of your work, and then you try to squeeze those numbers together into one single number, and you can't actually disaggregate these two pieces of information. The other one is that it conflates age with value. So as an academic progresses in his career, then more and more of them, he would have more and more papers, then his H index will very naturally increase. But that does not necessarily mean that he's becoming a better and better researcher. So this metric has quite a lot of problems. Now, another metric that people very often use is number of citations, or field-weighted citation impact, which is a normalized way of counting citation, but it is still based on citation counting. Now, we know that citation pattern follows a power law, which means that 80% of the citations go to 20% of the publications. So for a normal academic, if you plot out their citation numbers, it will look very similar to the chart on the slide here. So this is an actual real researcher, and he has published 14 papers. Most of those papers didn't receive any citation, and then a small number of papers receive minimal citation. But there is one single paper which is a blockbuster. It received a lot of citation, so it has an outlier which is an FWCI of over 700. Now, if you simply count the number of citation, you would think that this academic has produced really, really great work. But if you dive down into individual papers, you will see that actually most of the work is fairly average. It's just that this author has a one-hit wonder that drags up the overall average. So again, if we look at pure citation count or field-weighted citation impact, it can be highly misleading. Now, the final problem I want to talk about is one thing that we see more and more often. And initially, we tend to see this in high-energy physics. So these are what we call 1,000-author papers. So most of the papers coming from CERN or other centers of high-energy physics research would have thousands of authors. And we're now seeing more and more of those in other fields as well, such as, for example, health. We see that a lot of the papers that are organized by WTO, sorry, not WTO, WHO, would have thousands of authors. And you can see that coming into computer science as well. I mean, a lot of the AI-based papers these days have, hundreds of authors, if not thousands. So we can see that this phenomenon is actually spreading. Now, the traditional way of giving credit to authors is that every single author in the paper gets equal credit. So if you're looking at citation count, whether you are the first author, the last author, or somewhere in the middle, you will be recognized just as everybody else in that paper. Now, this has some issue because as these research consortiums grows bigger and bigger, it becomes harder and harder to distinguish individual contribution to these papers. We don't want to discourage collaboration, obviously, but we also want to make sure that what we measure is actually the contribution of the author rather than the shared glory of these massive research consortiums. So our solution is a new way of measuring the author's contribution, and we use 5 different metrics to do it. The first one is, well, what is the researcher's typical quality? So we still use field-weighted citation impact, but we use a mathematical technique to strip out the outliers so that we are not distracted by the one-hit wonders. And then we look at how the academic is setting the agenda for the conversation for their own field. So for that, we use gravitas, research gravitas, to measure that. I'll explain a little bit later about what this actually means. And then the third one is publication volume. Now, all things being equal, and a publisher that publish more is contributing more into the development of human knowledge. So that should be rewarded. But you can see that it is a relatively small number compared with the other metrics. We also don't want to lose sight of the best work of the academic, so we want to measure how much of his work is in the global top 10%. And finally, we want to separate out the collaborative measures of the collaborative volume from an author, so that we can actually understand the level of collaboration that he has. So if we look at these metrics together, so publication volume and collaboration intensity, both of these are about volume, so they make up roughly 1/3. The typical quality, again, this is about the typical research work, so that is another 1/3. And then the best work from the author is driven would drive gravity and also the best work metrics. So again, this is another 1/3. So it's basically 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Volume, typical quality, your best work. For this analysis, we use the data from OpenAlex. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, OpenAlex is an open source bibliometric database. So it is similar to the well-known databases such as Web of Science or Scopus, but that is also quite different in it as well. So this is primarily a community-driven database. So it is much bigger. So it covers non-English language content much better, and it also covers non-STEM subjects much better. On the other hand, it is not a curated database, so there are works in there which are not that are potentially of not good quality. So we use a lot of these mathematical techniques that we mentioned to actually filter out some of those work or reduce the influence of those work. Now, another really important thing about this database is that it is community driven. So if you see something which is not correct in the database, you can contact them and you can ask them for correction. Whereas if you use a commercial database, unless you're a subscriber, you won't even know that your work is being described or attributed incorrectly. So we really like this transparency, this openness. So that's why we use this as our primary data source for the analysis. Now, like all bibliometric databases, these are live databases. So if I ask a question now, and I ask the same question 6 months later, it may give me a slightly different answer 6 months from now. So what we did was we extracted a snapshot on the 1st of November last year, and we based our analysis on that snapshot. So if we rerun the analysis today, the result would be very similar, but it may be slightly different. The framework that I talked to you about a minute ago on how we measure the academics is highly flexible. At the moment, we have published the ranking for 6 of the 7 top level subject domains. So they are business and economics all the way down to engineering. Now, this framework is also highly flexible. We can apply it equally to a lower level subject as well. So for example, instead of looking at business and economics, we can look at HR, we can look at marketing, we can look at other subjects within business and economics. And we can even drill down to individual research topics. So for example, in engineering, you can be talking about specifically railway engineering or aviation engineering. So these are things that we can dive all the way down into using this framework. Now you will see that I have grayed out arts and humanities. Now the reason for that is arts and humanities, of course, has very different publication and citation patterns. So using the framework that I talked about on arts and humanities may lead to results that are not necessarily reflective of the field. So what we have decided is we'll continue to refine our ideas, and hopefully we will bring a talent list for arts and humanities to the market very soon. Now, I mentioned earlier that looking at citation alone can be highly misleading in terms of understanding the sustained quality of the author's work. So how do we deal with that? Well, this is the citation graph of one particular source of publications. And you will see that, again, well, some publications would have very low or zero citation, and most publications would be somewhere in the middle. And then there would be a small number of what we call outliers or blockbusters who receive a lot of citations. So what we do here is that we discard the bottom 5%, and then we also discard the top 5%, and then we only measure the average from the 90% in the middle. Now, this has a good advantage of not being distracted by the one-hit wonders, but it also allows the academics some freedom to explore new area without having to worry about being penalized if they explore new idea and that work receive relatively few citations. So this gives the academics the freedom to explore new area without being penalized. Now, what is the effect of this, what we call Olympic mean, for stripping away the top 5% and stripping away the bottom 5%? If an author is a normal academic, you will see that the score would drop a little bit. So, for example, in this fictional, with this fictional author, the raw FWCI average may be 2.5, and then if we strip off the extremes, the score may drop down to 1.7. So this is fairly normal. But if you were comparing everyone against this Olympic mean, then it would be a fair comparison. Now, but for some authors which rely on one or two highly cited paper, but their own work is really average, then the drop would be very significant. So in the second fictional author, the raw FWCI calculation would give them a score of, let's say, 3.5. But once we strip off the outliers, the score may only drop down to 0.8. So that would be a very dramatic reduction. And that is exactly what we want to do, because we want to strip away the one-hit wonders, the distractions, when we're measuring the average work. Now, another metric that we have is what we call gravitas. And this is kind of like a graphical representation of what that actually means. So each of the notes here represents an author, and the link between them measures how frequently they cite each other. So when there is a strong citation relationship, then the link would be really strong, and the two notes would be very tightly bound together. But if there is a very loose citation relationship, they only rarely cite each other, then the bond will be weak, and then they will be further apart. And if they have never cited each other, there won't be a bond between them. Now, the notes that are closer to the center of the graph here are the ones who say things that other important notes are listening to. So these are the people who actually set the agenda for the field of research in their own area. So what we want to capture that and use, and the technique that we use is PageRank. You may have heard of that from Google. And that tells us who are, not only how many people are listening to you, but also how important are those people within that graph. So this helps us to distinguish what are the anchors versus what's the noise. Now, one example that I like to talk about is, well, if we look at social media, we are all on social media these days. Well, if you are, let's say, a celebrity and you post something and you suddenly get, what, millions of likes and millions of reposts, does that actually change anything? That really, very most often that do not change anything. So those are things that go viral, but those are not necessarily things that actually matter in society. That things that set the tone of the conversation. So we want to measure who are the people who set the tone of the conversation, who set the agenda of the conversation. Those are what we call the anchors. So I think for academics, the same idea applies. Who are the people who publish works that go viral, but have only a very short amount of short span of attention from the other academics, versus who are the people who actually set the agenda. They may not get as many citations, but what they say defines the field for a long time to come. Now, the other metric that I want to talk about is what we call collaboration intensity. So here we use quite a simple mathematical formula to count the work, the contribution of each author's work. So basically, we divide 2 by the number of authors in each paper. So, for example, if an author, if a paper has if a paper has 1 author, then that is not a collaborative work. So that author will get 0 in terms of collaboration intensity from that work. If a paper has 2 authors, then each of them would get equal credit for that paper. So that's one. And then if there are 5 authors, then the volume would be but the credit would be slightly smaller, and so on. And then when you get to 1,000 authors, then the get from that work becomes very, very small. So this way we can actually distinguish between meaningful collaboration, where each author has to make a contribution to the paper, versus a mass research consortium, where very often you're just listed as one of the names. So and then that way, when we combine all of the contribution from all the papers from an author, we know the collaboration intensity of that author. Now, a little bit about a meta description of the metrics. We talked about quite a few metrics already, but what we want to do is that we want to make sure the metrics that we use are subfield normalized. What I mean by that is, even for example, under, let's say, engineering, aviation engineering is very different from civil engineering. They may have very different publication patterns, they may have very different citation patterns, and the network of citations are also very different. So what we do is we make sure that the calculation we do is normalized down to the subfield level, so that we actually take these things into account and we actually compare things apple to apple. Now, in terms of the ranking that we published about 2 weeks ago, so we have a set of eligibility criteria. So we want to make sure that the academic that we rank actually have a substantial research activity. So they must publish at least 20 publications over the 5-year evaluation period. The five-year evaluation period is year 2020 to 2024. And we also make sure that the authors are still current. So that what we mean by that is the first publication from them must be less than 60 years old. And we also want to make sure that they are still actively researching. So the most recent publication must be from the last 3 years. And then if they satisfy these 3 criteria, then they go into the evaluation. And we actually evaluate tens of thousands of authors. And the list that you see on the website, we only publish the top 100 of the authors in each field. But if you're interested in obtaining the full list, do let us know. We're happy to share that with you. Now, based on some of the things that we talked about, or some of the metrics that we have developed, we can observe quite a few really useful things that I think people may not know already. So the first thing is that in the higher education world, we keep saying China's rise. I mean, China is rising, but that is old news. China is not rising. China is already at the top and is actually dominating. So if we look at the 2 really STEM-heavy subject areas, so engineering and physical sciences, China is already heavily dominating. China, out of the top 100 talents, China has 50 in engineering. So half of that is from China. And then the US is second far behind with only 15 academics, and then the UK and Germany each has 6. So China is not rising. China is already at the top, and it's already dominating. And it's dominating in engineering and physical sciences. So you can see where the national priority is. Now, in contrast, the more traditional academic hubs, such as the US, such as the UK, they still have quite a lot of expertise. But now most of the expertise are in, for example, health sciences, social sciences, and life sciences. These are much more human-oriented things and human-oriented subjects. So you can again see a shift in the national focus from these areas. Maybe they're not conscious decisions from the leadership, but this is the result. We can see that China is dominating in STEM areas, and then the traditional Western education hubs are strong in the more human-oriented areas. Now, different subjects have different research dynamics. Some subjects, for example, mathematics, we tend to see people rising up through the ranks, and then they only get to the top of the field when they are great and have a white beard and so on. But in some fields, we see a lot more young stars, and these are the people that that only started publishing in the last 20 years. So these are mostly academics, maybe around the age of, say, up to 45, 50. So they still have a long career ahead of them. And you can see that in business and economics, a third of them are relatively young. So this is a field that has, quite dynamic, and we are seeing a lot more upward mobility from the academics versus the other fields that tends to require a longer time to build up their profile. Another thing that we can see from the result this year is that the non-traditional education hubs are now extremely active in poaching and acquiring talents. So in places such as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Azerbaijan, we can see that they are getting really strong talents from the West and then moving them to either run a whole department or sometimes even a whole university. So they are very aggressive in headhunting these global elites into running their university. Now, whether these elite can be used to bootstrap the local talents from these places, we will still need to see, but we can see the intention is definitely there already. Now, what does this all mean for university leaders such as yourself? The first thing I would encourage you to do is to audit your talent portfolio. How many of your academics are in the anchor category? People who can actually set the agenda of the conversation in their field? And how many of them are in the engine category? People who may keep their head down, do the research, who keep publishing a good volume of paper and also getting good quality citations for them. For university, you actually need both. A university's reputation is primarily driven by the anchors. But you also need the volume and the citation if you are interested in ranking. So if you look at both QS and THE, the way that they measure citation, the way that they measure quality, research quality, is highly reliant on number of citations and number of publications. So actually, for a university leader, you need to have both, but you need to know who is in which category. And also, you may want to understand who are people who are just publishing a lot of work but don't actually matter. So you can see that in this fictional author, he is publishing a lot. So he achieved a very high score for the publication volume metric. But in the gravitas metric, he's scoring very low. Now, this may sometimes be legitimate, but sometimes it may also indicate that this author is engaging in what we call inorganic behavior. So, or even more frankly, gaming. So maybe he's engaging in paper mills, maybe he's buying public co-authorship slots in other people's paper and so on. So these are places where you need to start drilling down and understanding exactly what's happening within your talent portfolio. Now, another one is the free rider symptom. So we mentioned earlier that more and more people more and more research are done by extremely large consortiums. Now, that is not necessarily a problem, but if somebody's work is if somebody only works with these massive consortiums, then you may want to pay more attention to them. So here, within the top 100, most of them are actually absolutely fine. But even within the top 100, we can see that there are two people whose raw publication volume score is much higher than their collaboration volume score. So these people are probably working with very large consortiums, and then therefore don't get as much credit for the work. So you may want to understand, well, what is their individual contribution to the papers? then again, this helps you highlight the individuals that you may want to do a deep dive on. Now, understanding the talent is really the name of the game here. So I would highly suggest any university to map out the researchers that they already have into a talent pipeline. Who are the people who are still emerging, and who are the people who are in the anchor position already? So once you have this idea within your organization, and then you can understand how you can actually help them. So for example, for emerging talents, you may want to help them partner with the leaders within their field so that they can absorb the knowledge as quickly as possible. Whereas if you have a lot of anchors already within your university, then you may want to ask the question, are you promoting them correctly so that you attract other people who want to partner with you? And also funders who may recognize the name and then therefore provide you with funding to do your research. So map out your university's pipeline is really important for the longevity of your university's research health. And then once you have highlighted your map out your pipeline, then, well, you may see gaps within your pipeline, and then you can start thinking about how do you do precision hiring so that if I am missing some, for example, some people in the middle, let's say the elite group, then I can specifically hire for that group so that my pipeline is continuous and I can ensure that my research result is strong over the years. Conversely, you may also want to look at your pipeline and see, actually, I have a few people that are really, really important for my university's research strength. Therefore, I should make sure that they are not poached by other people. So identifying these people help you design a retention strategy that can shield your staff from being poached. So a quick summary about what we just talked about. So first of all, audit your talents, understand where they are. And if you actually want to know whether beyond the top 100 list, who in your university, well, the people in your university, where are they ranked within our ranking? Do let us know. We can work with you on that. And then once you have done the auditing, then the next step is to actually map them out in your pipeline, understand where you're strong, where you're weak. And then the final part is to execute. Whether it is in terms of hiring people to plug gaps in your pipeline or protecting your pipeline by shielding them from poaching. These are the things that university leaders can do using the data that we have shown here. So with that, thank you for, that concludes my presentation, and thank you for your time. So let's see if we have any question.
Thanks, Billy. We do have some questions. If anybody does want to pose a question, there's a link to the form where we're capturing the questions in the chat. So first question we've got, has your approach been able to disaggregate the higher education research community by anything other than age?
Well, in terms of, other than age, of course, we also know the geographical location of the authors. And we also know the different subject areas, obviously. But other things that we can probably make an educated guess on, such as things such as gender, because in some countries the names are very indicative of the gender, and in some countries that's not the case. So, for example, if you look at the names in Thailand, once it's translated into English, you can't actually tell the names very easily. So that is more of an educated guess rather than a clear distinction. But we can definitely disaggregate across multiple dimensions.
Okay. Why is this better than other measures of talent?
Hopefully, I have addressed that at the beginning of the conversation. The most common metric that we have seen, that we have heard universities mention are publication volume, citation volume, and H index. And each of these things is highly gameable. We talked about things such as, for example, paper mills earlier. There are also like things such as, dubious self-citation or citation cartels, and these things like that. And you can see that the way that we have designed our metric is explicitly to address these things, these non-organic behavior, but continue to reward good behavior.
Okay. I'll just wait a second to see if there's any more questions that we have. So there's a comment, high energy physics. I'm not sure what the question is there. So if anybody has a follow-up question to high energy physics with 3 exclamation marks, please do let me know. But yeah, just wait a second to see if there's any others. Okay, there is a generic question. I think you've covered some of this, Billy, but I think it would be good to summarize it. How can I use the Talent 100 at my university?
Yes. So, well, first of all, if your university has a winner within the top 100, celebrate with them, give them a pay rise. So that is that will already inform your retention strategy. Make sure that who are the stars already in your organization, and make sure that they have sufficient resource to do the work to their best potential. But beyond the top 100, we actually evaluated tens of thousands of academics around the world. So we can share that information with you, and that can help you understand where your researchers actually are. So in terms of your research pipeline, what you want to have is basically a really healthy research pipeline from people who are just starting their research career to the mid-career researchers, and then to the leaders in their field. You want to have a continuous pipeline rather than having gaps in the middle. Now, by mapping out where your researchers are currently and how strong they are, then you can see whether there are potential gap in the middle that you will need to address.
And do you think you will produce this ranking again? And if so, will it change?
Well, we very much look forward to producing the second edition next year. And so far, I have heard quite a few positive feedback about our methodology. But if anyone else has interesting ideas or suggestions that how we can solve this problem better, then I would love to hear that. And we are very open to working with the sector to co-develop this ranking.
Okay, no more questions have come in. So I think, Billy, we should probably end it there.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.